look at one of the most difficult passages in the Torah, difficult in terms of our sensibilities. We're going to try to understand not only that paragraph, but the Jewish approach towards war in general. And by the time we finish, hopefully we'll have a better understanding of how to approach these kinds of passages in the Torah.
Can you put that closer to your mouth?
Okay, gotcha. Thank you. It's not working, right?
It's working.
It's working, okay. All right, fine. If you take a look at the first page of your handouts. Now, before I forget, due to an oversight, Hashem's name appears in this handout. So although I treat all the handouts as Shemot, this one is really Shemot. So please, if either take it back and put it in Shemot or give it to me. Okay. All right, I don't know what to do here. Okay. Can you hear me better like this?
Yes.
Okay, and that's what we'll do. All right. What I said, for those that couldn't hear, is that this shiur falls into the category of what I would say you can run but not hide. What I mean by that is this is a passage in the Torah that most of us would like to ignore, not deal with. It runs against the sensibilities that we have been raised with, and it's difficult for us to understand. Take a look at the story of the battle against Midian, which occupies the first part of your source sheets. God commands Moshe to respond to the devastation that has been caused by the Midianites and the tragic events surrounding Baal Peor. If you remember, at the end of Bilam's journey, he moves from, according to Chazal and from the Torah text itself, he moves from cursing Bnei Yisrael, or trying to curse Bnei Yisrael, to actually moving against them by bringing the women from Midian to seduce them and causing them to worship idolatry. Many of them take part in this extravaganza, and Hashem responds by creating a plague, and many, many Israelites perish because of the events at Baal Peor. Hashem therefore commands Moshe to take, not revenge, but to act out against Midian, that they are your enemies. You need to pursue them. You need to pursue them immediately upon my commandment. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says that you are not to spare anyone. They're not to be spared. And the Israelites set out against Midian, and the battle against Midian begins. If you turn to the second page, the victorious army returns, and Moshe is angered. Why is Moshe angered? If you take a look at the top of the page, he says to the army, did you let every female live? They were the ones who caused the children of Israel by the word of Bilam to commit a betrayal against the Lord, Baal Peor. Moshe commands the nation, and this is where it gets even harder for us to understand. Moshe commands the nation to put all Midianite children and all females old enough to be sexually active to death by the sword. All female children, he explains, can remain in captivity. How are we to approach what seems to us as Jewish jihad? In other words, how are we to approach this kind of text in the Torah where we are acting out? No, it doesn't work.
No,
It works, but it doesn't. They say they hear me better this way.
okay, someone just asked me.
All right, you want me to try again? Okay, I'll try again. All right. Okay. All right, good. Oh, we're trying again. Okay. It's better on my vocal cords as well. All right, so how do we approach this very, very difficult passage? How do we understand God's commandment to kill women and children? What's going on here? and we speak out against those who produce jihad and kill civilians, how are we to explain what we did? So first thing we have to do is we have to back up. We're going to leave this section and we're going to return to it at the end of the class. We have to back up and start examining how does Jewish law view war? And what are the rules of engagement? And how do they apply to us today as well? So if you look, you find in section number, well, before we do that, actually, I forgot section number 2, which is wrongly marked section number 3. The fact that we have a problem with this is mirrored by Chazal. It's not as if we shouldn't feel bad that we are wrestling with our understanding of this text. Chazal create a medrash in which Shaul, the first king, is arguing with HaKadosh Baruch Hu upon receiving the commandment to destroy Amalek. And Shaul says, concerning one slain soul, the Torah mandates the atoning ritual of the axe heifer, of the Eglah Arufa. How much more will atonement be necessary if I slay them? And if the people have sinned, how have the animals sinned? And if the adults have sinned, how have the children sinned? So what you have here is you have really the questions that we're asking, and look at God's response. Don't be overly righteous. I told you to do this, do it. So the Medrash really leaves the question hanging, but shows us that Chazal struggled with the very same struggle that we are having when we view passages like this. So now let's go. Let's go back to approaching war from a Jewish perspective. First thing we do is we have to classify 2 different kinds of war. There is what is called within Chazal Melechet Mitzvah, and there's Milchemet Reshut. There are wars that are a mitzvah to fight, such as Midian, commanded by God. And there are wars that are up to us. We can determine, or up to the leaders, we can determine whether to fight those wars or not. If you turn the page, the first Rambam, the bottom of the page on page 2 says it in Hebrew. The Rambam explains the differences between Milchemet Mitzvah and Milchemet Reshut. First of all, we have to understand that the category of Milchemet Mitzvah is very severely limited. It applies only to the 7 nations that occupied occupied Canaan on Israel's entry into the land. They had to be eradicated. And it applies to Amalek. And it applies to anyone who attacks us. So Milchemet Mitzvah is self-defense and the eradication of evil, represented by those nations and by Amalek. And what we are told in the obligatory conflict, no living soul is to be left alive. And we'll come back to this in just a moment, though. Then there's Milchemet Reshut, and by the way, the king, the Rambam says, the king can decide on his own when it's time to do this Milchemet Mitzvah, because it's a standing commandment. He doesn't have to consult with anyone. He can command the war. Milchemet Reshut is different. Milchemet Reshut is a war that a nation needs to fight or decides to fight to expand its borders, to increase its mark on the society. A Milchemet Reshut needs, the king must confer with the Sanhedrin before calling the war. And in a Milchemet Reshut, the Jewish nation must spare the lives of enemy women and children. Okay? The difference between Milchemet Reshut and Milchemet Mitzvah. Now, however, yes?
Today, does the the head of a state, halachically, is he halachically like the king for the purpose of...
Does the head of the state have the right to declare Melchemet Mitzvah today? It's a good question. I doubt it, because the rules for a king were very specific. And no one today classifies as a king in that regard.
They are.
What? They think they are. They act like they are. So I don't think that the law would say, that halacha would say, that the prime minister can do it without consultation. But this is the way it was when we had kings.
So the war we're fighting today is...
I'll get to you, all right? We're going to talk about that, the war we're fighting today. All right. There is a passage in the Torah, however, that is the source of tremendous debate. Take a look at the bottom of page 3. Ki sikrav el ir lihilochem oleho, v'korosa eleho l'shalom. When you are about to engage in a battle or in a war against a particular city or place or country, your first step must be to offer them the possibility of peace. And if they accept the possibility of peace, they will become part of your society in a lower level. In other words, you will, like Evet Kanani, let's say. And under those conditions, they will be spared. If they refuse to accept peace, then you are to engage in war. Now, what's the debate about this section? Does this refer only to Milchemet Reshut, or does it refer to Milchemet Mitzvah as well? Rashi and many others, if you take a look at the bottom of the page, Rashi says, B'Milchemet HaReshut HaKatuv Medaber. The Torah is here speaking about the rules only of optional warfare. And by the way, from the flow of the text, it seems that that is the case. And therefore, what it would mean is I only need to sue for peace or give the option for peace in an optional war. But in a Milchemet Mitzvah, I have to engage without that. However, a number of other commentaries, particularly the Rambam and the Ramban, say differently. Take a look at the language of the Rambam. The first sentence is powerful. Ein osim milchama im adam ba'olam ad shekorin lo shalom. Echad milchemet harashut ve'echad milchemet mitzvah. We do not engage in war, says the Rambam, with any living soul. Now, who does that include? We'll have to see. But any living soul, he says, unless we first give them the option for peace. And that applies to both Milchemet Mitzvah and to Milchemet Reshut.
What was his source for this then?
What? Say again?
What was his source for
The source, his source, he understands that passage that we just read in the Torah as being more expansive than Rashi and others. He says that refers to every war. It refers to every war. Now, this becomes a little problematic when we consider Milchemet Mitzvah, because we said that Milchemet Mitzvah is reserved only for the 7 nations, right? And for Amalek, and anyone who attacks you, but that's another. So are we saying that we have to give Amalek the chance to sue for peace? We've been told to wage war against Amalek. We'll come back to that. But what about the 7 nations? We entered Canaan and we decimated many of the nations. Did we, before we did so, did we sue for peace? Did we offer them peace? Certainly doesn't emerge from the Tanakh that we did. However, if you take a look at Halacha, at the Ramban down below, actually take a look first at the Rambam, and then the Ramban will expand what he says. He says, Rak me'oreu ha'amim lo techayeh kol neshama. Only from the 7 nations of the world you can't spare a soul. V'kein omer ba'Amalek timched zecher Amalek. Uminayin sha'anu medaber elo ba'elu shelo hishlimu. I'm telling you, says the Rambam, when the commandment exists to move against the 7 nations, those are only those nations which did not accept your terms of peace. And it includes, now it seems it includes Amalek, but we'll come back to that. So what you have here is you have the Rambam saying that we entered Canaan, we first pursued peace. The Ramban brings down a rabbinic tradition. If you look at the underlined section at the bottom, Ma'asa Yoshua, Haya Sholeach Prus Dictamo. Now, I looked up that word in English, it doesn't exist. So I'm not quite sure what a Prus Dictamo is, but it's some sort of message, right? כל מקום שהיה הולך לכבוש לא יכוסף בו מי שמבקש להשלים יבוא וישלם ומי שמבקש ללך לא ילך לו ומי שמבקש לעשות מלחמה do מלחמה. Says the Ramban, before attacking any one of those nations we pursued peace. It's not there, it's not written in Yehoshua, you don't see it. But these members of Chazal, and certainly the Rambam and the Ramban are towering figures in halachic development. They say that it applies both to Milchemet Mitzvah and to Milchemet Reshut, and it applied to the 7 nations. And
to convert to Judaism?
no, very interesting. They have to, it seems that they have to become, we'll talk about what they have to do, all right? Talk about that. All right. Take a look, however, at the bottom of the paragraph on page 5. V'nira sheyesh hefresh od b'sheila shalom, שבערים הרחוקות נשאל להם לשלום ויהיו למס ויעבדום, אבל בערים האלה נשאל להם שלום ומיסים ועבדוס על מנס שקיבלו. Okay, can you still hear me? Yeah, all right, the mic is still working. The lights are out, but the mic is still working. All right, so what do we have? We have Yehoshua, apparently according to the Medrash, sent messages to the 7 nations, saying to them, it's your choice. You can have peace with us and become sort of our servants, people who were conquered, and we'll see what that means in a moment. Or you can leave, your option, or you can fight. And if you're going to fight, this is a Milchemet Mitzvah.
They attack OUisrael, the 7 nations.
No, not necessarily. We started. No. It's a Milchemet that we said. The details, the definition of a Milchemet Mitzvah is a war against Amalek, even if he doesn't attack you at that point. A war against the 7 nations, even if they don't attack you, you have to eradicate them. And a war against someone who attacks you. So these particular cases, and we'll have to discuss why, these particular cases you had to go. Your job was to attack them, according to the Rambam and the Ramban, after giving them the option for peace.
So how do they interpret the issue of the Gibeonites?
All right. So, okay, excellent.
In order to get peace, but they could have just said we.
All right, very good. If you remember, the Givonim come to the Bnei Israel and say they want to have peace, and they actually masquerade as a distant population, et cetera, and Israel accepts them with serious limits. The rabbis who say that we sued for peace use that as an example. Because when the Tanakh describes the Givonim, it says they were the only ones who accepted peace. So if you're saying that they were the only, no, in other words, no one accepted peace except for the Givonim.
There was a Shomronim.
What?
Shomronim later converted.
Well, that's later. That's later. This is, no one at the time of Yehoshua, in other words, it's in Yehoshua. Let me see if I have that. Yehoshua Yud Aleph, Yud Tes and Kaf. If you take a look at the top of page 5, the second underlined line at the end, right, okay, where is it? I'm sorry, down about 5 lines down. V'kein omar ha'kasuv b'chulam, lo ha'isa'ir asher hishlima el b'nei Yisrael, bilti hachivi yoshvei givon. So what is it literally saying? There was no nation that accepted peace except for the Givonim. Now, if it's saying that in Yehoshua, it would seem that if the Givonim are the only ones who are accepting peace, it means the other ones had the opportunity to accept peace.
Why would they have to disguise themselves?
What?
Just accept peace?
Good question. Why did they then have to disguise themselves? We'd have to analyze the event a little more clearly. But this pasuk from Yehoshua is used by those who say that we sued for peace even with the nations. Yes?
Good point. The big fancy word you wrote there, that was a delegation that went to TORAH.
I'm sorry, say again?
That was a delegation they sent to TORAH.
Oh, you mean now, today, a delegation to, all right. We're going to talk about today, yeah.
Nothing else. Suppose some of the people come to the city and they put the white flag up, some of the people.
Right.
Nothing.
It's a very good question. We'll get to that in a minute. That's the next step. The next step, okay, so far we have difference of opinion concerning suing for peace. Some commentaries saying it's before every war, some saying it's only before an optional war. Now, the next thing that happens is Chazal look at the psukim concerning the Midianite war. And it says the following, if you take a look at the bottom of page 5, Vayitzpa'u al Midian, kasher tziva Hashem es Moshe, vayahargu kol zachor. They attacked or massed against Midian as the Lord commanded Moshe. So say to the rabbis, wait a minute. It seems from the text that Moshe commanded them a specific thing concerning the attack. Not just that they should attack, but he gave them some sort of definition as to the limitations or the character of the attack. Chazal say, you know what it was? It was a rule. When you fight against an enemy, you can only surround them from 3 sides. You have to allow those who want to flee to flee. And they claim this was the case with Midian as well. And that's what it means when it says, Kasher tzivo Hashem es Moshe. We don't have a record of that commandment, but we have a record that it existed, say Chazal, and that's what it was. So now, not only do we have the possibility that we're supposed to sue for peace in every war, but every war is to be fought given those who have the option of waving the white flag and saying, we don't want any part of this. They have the opportunity. You have to give them the opportunity to escape. And since it's again against Midian as well, it would seem that it applies even during a milchemet mitzvah. Next. Take a look at page number 6. The Rambam at the top of the page codifies this statement, lahalocha, and says that whenever you are going against a city, you have to only surround, you're not allowed to surround it from 4 sides, you have to leave one side vacant. And this requirement apparently applies to all wars. But now we come to something else. And now we're going to move away from the biblical and the time of Tanakh to today. There is a fascinating understanding by Chazal that seriously affects our ability to wage war as a milchemet mitzvah. And what is that? It comes from a source in the Mishnah, but dealing with a different issue. If you take a look at section number 6, who's on first? And there's a summary of this underneath, but I'll read some of the Hebrew. Amar lo Rabbi Yoshua, what happened was an Ammonite, or a self-proclaimed Ammonite, someone from the nation of Ammon, came to the rabbis in the time of the Talmud, the Mishnah, and said, I want to convert. This presented a problem. Why? Because the Torah says you're not allowed to let an Ammonite convert to Judaism. What did they do? They accepted him. Amar lo Rabbi Yoshua, and it was a debate. V'chi Ammonim u'Moavim imkomon hein, kvar ola Sancherev melech Ashur uvilbel es kol ha'umot. We have no Ammonites today, says Rabbi Yoshua. From the time of Sancherev, we can no longer identify individuals who are part of specific nations. Now, why from the time of Sancherev? Because he was a very smart king. First of all, he is the one who exiled the 10 tribes. All right. In other words, Sancherev is the orchestrator of the exile of the 10 tribes. But what he did was very interesting. It's very smart. He would take a conquered people and he would split them apart into different sections, and he would move them to different places, certainly out of their land, but to different lands, to different countries, to different peoples. So you had some people living in X and some people living in Y, and what was the benefit to Sancherev? They couldn't get together and revolt. But that's why the 10 tribes disappear, because it happened to us. And the 10 tribes are lost because of Sancherev, because he spread them around and they assimilated some of them or disappeared into various different nations and various different populations, and they can't be identified today as a rule. There are those who claim that they have found some of the 10 tribes, and that maybe they have. Yes?
Was it during the time of when Yehuda and Binyamin were still left?
Right.
Went to all the different countries and gathered people from each tribe and brought them back to Yeshua.
Okay, that it's not written. It's a medrash. Huh?
It is written somewhere.
I'll have to find it out. All right. She's saying that Yirmiyahu went to the various places where the people of the 10 tribes were and take some of them back to be with Yehuda and Binyamin. In other words, we're not necessarily the descendants of only Yehuda and Binyamin. There were those who escaped. Could be, for sure, I would say, that some people of the 10 tribes did escape and went from the kingdom of Yisrael to the kingdom of Yehuda. So one way or the other. Yes, well done. The Ethiopians are different. The Ethiopians are a fascinating people. They are cut off earlier from the Jewish population as a people. Somehow, we don't know quite how.
Which tribe they're from?
We don't know what tribe they're, well, I don't think so. I don't think we know what tribe they're from.
know when.
Oh, done.
It happened around, we believe it happened in the time of Shlomo. And the Ethiopians are fascinating because they are a time warp. Basically, they are cut off from the development of halacha before the Talmud, before the Mishnah, before rabbinic law, to the extent that what they practiced basically was what Ethiopians got off the plane and said to the people who were there, take me to the Beis HaMikdash. I want to go to the Beis HaMikdash and I want to offer my sacrifices. They honestly believed that they had no idea that the Beis HaMikdash had been destroyed. there were people from the Ethiopia who came and said various things that showed that clearly they were cut off from all Jewish involvement. And the story of the Ethiopians continues to be a sad one because there are still many there that we have not brought over. And it's not clear why we're not bringing them over. So it's something to think about. But anyway,
Can I just ask you?
yes.
Was the injunction to offer peace preemptive or when war broke out?
Preemptive.
It was preemptive.
Preemptive. Before.
So what happened when war broke out from either one of the nations of the 7 nations or some other nations? Were they also offered peace or not?
According to, that's the debate. According to the Rambam and the Ramban, they were offered peace. According to others, no. All right, now, let's go. So what we have here is we have the rabbis saying that we can't identify an Egyptian today, right? We can't identify a Syrian today. I remember very clearly, and it was very powerful for me, we were in Rome, and we were talking, I just want to make sure that I don't oversay, we were talking about the Arch of Titus. And I gave a little speech to the group about Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and the role he played at the moment that we were exiled from Israel. And the tour guide, who was not Jewish, turned to us and said, he says, whenever I hear these stories, I am astounded. He said, I live in Rome. I can't claim to be a Roman, right? I cannot trace myself back to the members of the Roman Empire. Nobody can. Basically, the powerful Roman Empire, gone, right? But the Jews, we can identify our generations. We can identify the flow. And he really was astonished. And we should be astonished and thankful to Hashem and thankful to those who labored in such difficult circumstances to retain their Judaism. Yes?
Sorry, what's the halachic relevance of DNA testing to some cases?
Whoa. It's a very good question. What's the halachic relevance of DNA testing? Well, yeah, it's a whole discussion. It couldn't apply here because we don't have the initial DNA. In other words, I don't have the DNA of Achivi, so I can't look at DNA. The question comes up about Kohanim. They've done research, a very interesting story where a Kohen who was an Ashkenazi saw a Sephardi get an aliyah in his minyan and said, what, he's my cousin? Right? How could it be? And he was a scientist and he researched and found that there is a certain marker in the DNA that is found in most Kohanim, not all Kohanim, but it's not found in anybody else. Not found in anybody else. So the question is, do we now have to do a DNA test to have someone be a Kohen, right? It's a very interesting question. Or better yet, can we use DNA to define whether someone is a Kohen or not? And the answer is something we should talk about another time. All right, let's go on. So what is happening now is the Rambam and others will take this concept of Bilbel ha'umos and apply it practically to war. And if you look at the Rambam at the bottom of the page, he says, and this is again, from all the quotes from the Rambam are from his Yad HaChazaka or Mishnah Torah, 2 names, which is his halachic work. He says, Kisha'olah Sancheiriv Melech Ashur, Bilbel kol homos ve'irvam zeh bazeh. When Sancheiriv rose up and conquered people, he separated them and got them irvim, mixed them up with other populations. Lefichach, at the bottom of the page, therefore, we can accept as a true convert an Adomi, a guy, someone who claims to be an Edomite, someone who claims to be an Egyptian, someone who claims to be, what's the third one he said? Mitzri, Ammonite, right? Ammonite. And therefore, they're not. Now, how does this apply to war? So take a look at the next page. This is the halacha where the Rambam says that we are commanded to destroy the 7 nations. Milchemes mitzvah. He says, mitzvah aseh lahacharim shiva amamin, shenemar, hacharem tacharimem, v'kol shaba liyado echad mehen, v'lo hargo, over below taseh. Says as follows. He says, it is a mitzvah to kill the Chivis, the Hittites, and anybody who meets a Hittite and doesn't kill him is sinning against the halachic rules. In other words, it remains, gotta kill the Hittites. But then he adds one line, ukvar avad zikron. And what does that mean? You can't identify them. They're gone. And therefore, now, the question will be, and if you look at their additional quotes down below, that talk about the issue of this mitzvah to kill a Hittite, and they say, if we could identify a Hittite, maybe we're supposed to give him, maybe we're supposed to let him sue for peace, depending if you hold that Milchemes mitzvah falls into that category, but you're enjoined to kill him. But we can't identify him, so it doesn't apply. What about Amalek? All right, how do we deal with that? What about Amalek? All right, so if we look, there are 2 places in the Torah where the concept of destroying Amalek is outlined. In Shemot, it says, Vayomer ki yad al keska milchama l'Hashem ba'Amalek midor dor. The hand is on the throne of God. Yad al keska, Hashem is swearing, is saying that it is a milchama from generation to generation. Next. Hashem, the next statement, the second, it's one line up from the bottom. When you have peace in your land and you timche et zecher Amalek, eradicate the memory of Amalek. By the way, this is an interesting halacha because if you read the text, it seems that it's self-contradictory. Lo tishkach timche et zecher, right? Don't forget, erase the memory. It's really easily understood. There's a difference between forgetting and eradicating. If you forget something, it's still there. And it'll come back. If you eradicate it, it's gone. So therefore, what we're told, we have to, now, so therefore, does this apply to anybody today? I can't recognize Amalek. So the Rambam does something very, very interesting. When it comes to the 7 nations, we saw that he said, Kvar Ovad Zichram. When it comes to Amalek, in the next halacha, page number 8, Kein mitzvahs aseh li'abed zecher Amalek, shenemar timcha, mitzvah's positive commandment to eradicate the memory of Amalek, and does not add Kvar Ovad Zichram. He does not add that statement which he adds when it comes to the 7 nations. Kvar Ovad Zichram. Why does he leave it out when it comes to Amalek? And Is he saying that I can identify an Amalekite today? So there's a whole range of debate about this. What is Amalek? What does it represent? Is it a philosophical concept today? The Rav Soloveitchik, says it depends on the understanding of the text. There are two places where we're commanded to destroy Amalek. In one, it says, the first one, we read it, Yad al Keska, it's a swearing by God. There is enmity against Amalek forever. And then there's a second one which says, when you are at peace in Israel, in the land that you enter, Timche et Zecher Amalek, eradicate the memory. Says the Rav, there are two kinds of Amalek. And he sees this as what the Torah is saying, these two different passages. There is the biological Amalek. And that biological Amalek we were enjoined to destroy when it said, Timchet Zecher Amalek. That's what it's referring to, the biological Amalek. Says the Rambam, says the Rav, that mitzvah we can no longer fulfill. But there is a second kind of Amalek. Anyone who rises up against us in horrendous fashion is Amalek, says the Rav. And that's why the Rambam doesn't say Kvar Ovad Zichram by Amalek, because he's saying that there is one kind of Amalek that their memory has not perished, has not disappeared. And that is Hamas, Hezbollah. Give me the whole litany. Yes?
I'm not trying to understand. I may have missed what you were saying. Is it the 7 nations?
Right.
Are we suing for peace with them, or are we destroying them?
Again, it's a debate.
Can you repeat?
He's asking when it came to the 7 nations, did we sue for peace first, or did we just destroy them? The answer is it's a debate. There are those who say that we sued for peace, and that's the Rambam and the Ramban. There are others, including Rashi, who say no. The only time you sue for peace is with Chemes Rishus, an optional war.
And with Amalek, it's different.
And then it would be with Amalek, it would be, right, correct. Yes.
But then the Hamas and Shus didn't have to use the Urim and Tumim to figure out whether or not it's supposed to. And then you have
Correct. You had a debate with Right. And the king had to consult with Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin had to, during the time when the Urim and Tumim were in existence and could tell us things, then we had to consult with that. But the fact is that when it was lost, it was consultation with Sanhedrin. And actually consulting the Urim and Tumim often was how to go. In other words, it told you where to attack first, what to do. All right, turn to the next page. All right, if you take a look at the bottom of page 8, for those who will keep the sources, we have the Rav suggesting, right? You shall blot out the remembrance of Amalek, that refers to the biological Amalek, the war with Amalek from generation to generation, establishes the obligation to obliterate any nation across the face of history that seeks to destroy the Jewish people. All right, now, there are 2 other points that I'm going to make, and then we're going to go back to Midian. And I write that we can safely assume that Hamas, Hezbollah, and all of those fall into the category of this philosophical Amalek that does not disappear. The bottom line. Yes?
How would we categorize today Europe after our 2,000-year history?
How would we categorize Europe in our 2,000-day history? So the answer, I think, would be those who are maintaining that kind of enmity fall into the category of Amalek. In other words, I would not say that they are going to pay for the sins of their fathers and grandfathers. Unfortunately, that's not an option for us.
Yeah, it's coming out today.
But absolutely, it's coming out today. Absolutely.
It appears that it's not entire nations, but it's throughout.
Individuals. And the answer to that would be that would apply. Anybody who tries to obliterate the Jewish people or destroy the Jewish nation falls into the category of Amalek, according to what the Rav is saying. And that would be individuals. Nasser, right, in Egypt, was an Amalekite. That's the idea. Now, there are two other things that I just want to bring up. The first is very short. The Rambam, when he speaks about conquering nations after suing for peace, adds an additional requirement of them. Not only do they have to agree to be subjugated or subservient, they have to keep Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach. They have to agree to obey 7 basic moral laws. And that suddenly what happens is he changes the whole dimension of warfare. Because it's what is war? It's spreading morality. It's taking those who don't keep Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach and saying, if you want to make peace with us, then you have to obey it. And it's therefore increasing the observance of God's law for those nations. So someone asked, do we require them to convert to Judaism? The answer is not. According to the Rambam, we require them to accept the 7 mitzvot. All right, finally on page 9, I return to Midian at the bottom, what I call the bottom line. In dealing with passages such as the Battle of Midian, we're talking about extraordinary circumstances. We're talking about a battle not only for survival, but a battle to determine the moral compass of the world. In other words, this was darkness and light, and they could not coexist. And therefore, the battle of Midian that we read about in the text was not the battle that we have today. It was even deeper than that. It was a battle against light and darkness. It was a battle, and therefore, because it was a battle at the dawn of human history, or the dawn of Jewish history, because it was a battle between light and darkness, extraordinary responsibilities applied. And what you had to do is you had to eradicate everyone. Except for female children, etc., yes.
Wasn't the term Nikamah used in reference to Midian? So is that need to be...
Say, the word, yes, Nikom Nikmas, it says, take revenge or apply the revenge, Nikom Nikmat, using it as a verb and as a noun. Yes?
Did you say the 7 nations? Did you list the 7 nations?
Would I list the 7 nations? All right. Chiti, Prizi, Knani, Yevusi, Girgashi. Right. What? Knani, Chiti, Chivi, Prizi, Girgashi. I think Yevusi, kind of, right? Yevusi is another one, and I'm missing one. Well, I'm sorry, I don't hear you. No, they were not. This milchama that took place with Midian was an exceptional event, right, where we were required to eradicate them because of what they did to us. And therefore, it doesn't fall into all the other rules. It's an exceptional event, and that's how we should see it when we see it in the Torah. Okay, finally, the last thing I would say, and then we can throw the floor open for questioning. The proof is in the pudding. We today for the first time in centuries, have an army. And that army fights in a way that's different from everyone else. It's unheard of, for example, for other people to say to their enemy, get out because I'm coming. Right? Get out because I'm coming. There is no other army in the world that would allow, and this is under duress now, you're feeding them while you're fighting them, right? And we're required to do that. So what we have, take a look at the last paragraph of the source sheets. This is taken from the Israel Defense Forces Code of Ethics. The IDF servicemen and women will use their weapons and force only for the purpose of their mission, only to the necessary extent, and will maintain their humanity during combat. Our enemies did not retain their humanity during their attack. IDF soldiers will not use weapons of force to harm human beings who are not combatants or prisoners of war, and will do all in their power to avoid causing harm to their lives, bodies, and dignity. Okay. What I'm saying is the following. That's the product of centuries of how we viewed war. We end up as the most moral nation. And that means that the struggle that we've had to understand the difficult passage in the text leads us to an understanding of the halachic struggle to define war and to apply rules that no one else would apply. Okay. And our enemies are using civilians to protect themselves, and that creates problems. Okay, it's 1:15, and I'm told that I have to end, so I will end. But if anybody has questions, I'll take them personally. All the best.